Hi everyone, my name is Albert Lelesi. So in this tutorial, I'm going to be explaining the concept of artificial neural networks, which is called forward propagation, right? So the first, uh, the first thing we are going to discuss is the fact that the artificial neuron, it's the blueprint to create the artificial neuron is like the biological neuron. So like if you did like biology in high school, you would know that you would understand that this is the neuron, right? And this neuron, it has an axon, right? It has what we call a soma or cell body. It has the dendrites, right? So the dendrites are connections. So we have what we call the synapse, right? So the dendrites are they take in information into the cell body. They take, in this case, they take signals from other neurons into the cell body of this neuron, right? So, and then that signal is processed, and then that, and then it will the cell body will output the signal, its own signal, you know. It will process all those multiple signals from other neurons, and then it will output its own signal to other neurons also, right? So that's how it works, right? So in the case of the artificial neuron, as you can see here, we have the dendrites, right? So we have what we call the weights. So as you can see, the square blocks right there are called what we call weights. So the input is somewhere here, and then we have the weight, and then we have the components of basic. We have the cell body, right? So within this circle, there are two processes that are going to take place, which we really need to take note of. So we will have what we call summation, and summation is what we call in the concept of machine learning or artificial neurons, we call this linearization, and then we call threshold part, we call linearization. Sorry. Like I'm having like, I can't like pronounce the word, sorry about that. And then we have what we call the axon, right? So these multiple inputs, they're gonna come inside here, and then they're gonna be processed within the cell body, and then there will be an output right after that process. So if we scroll down, we will see that this is the model of a neuron, right? As you can see, the only parts that we are able to see is the input and the output. This one is the hidden part, right? So we have the inputs, which are x1, x2, x3, right? So basically the inputs are the data, the training data. So your model, you have to feed it with data in order to learn, right? And then we have what we call weights. So each input, it has a weight, right, associated with it, right? As you can see, we have 3 inputs, and each of those 3 inputs, they have associated weights along them, right? And then we have the summation function, right? So the summation function is gonna multiply. It's actually the sum of products, right? So we're gonna multiply x1 multiply by its weight, and then we say plus x2 multiply by its weight, which is WB, x3 multiply by its weight, which is WC, right? And then we're gonna get the answer. So we're gonna sum all of them here on the summation function. We get that answer. That answer, as you can see, we call this sign mu, right? This is used in mathematics and physics, you know, in most scientific courses. They use this sign. In this case, they've used it for this demonstration. So we call this mu, right? So that sum of products, they're gonna give us a value when we add all of them, and that value, which is mu, we're gonna select our, so this process, we call it linearization, and then we will have what we call the activation function, right? So that is a non-linearization process, right? That means here the input is going to be that sum of products, and then we are going to get our output. So this is basically what we call forward propagation, right? So we also have what we call the bias, right? Each node, you will see that each node, so if we have like multiple stages, each stage has its own bias. So we're gonna scroll down. So I have dummy training data, right? So you remember, like I said, like I said earlier in the beginning of the tutorial, I mentioned that a model, so this is a model, right? So for example, y is the output, and y is what we want to predict, and then what we predicted we're gonna compare with the actual value, right? So we're gonna have the actual values, and then those values we're gonna use certain parameters of those values as inputs, and then we're gonna feed them into our model, right? But then in this case, we actually not gonna teach our model, right? So this is just a demonstration of how the process goes, right? Actually, we have what we call the backward propagation. That is when we are reducing the difference, right, between the output, the predicted output, and the actual output, right? So what I mean by that, you will see, for example, we have a student, right? So we have a number of students. In this case, we have 3 students, right? So as you can see, the first student in row number 2. So in row number 2 of the table, as you can see, by row number 2 I mean this row right here. As you can see, they had 54%, they have 68% on test 2, they had 53% on test 3. So on the exam, this is the final mark they obtained, right? And so on with same story with other 2 students, right? So In this case, we want to create a model that's going to input those 3 tests, the marks of those 3 tests, and try to predict the mark of the student in the final mark, like the mark, the exam mark of the student, right, based on these inputs, right? So we're going to predict this input based on these, we're going to predict this output based on these 3 inputs, right? So what I'm going to do right now, just to show you how forward propagation works, so I'm going to select only this row, right? And then we are going to go about the steps, to demonstrate how the process goes. So as you can see, our model, we selected this data. As you can see, I'm gonna represent test 1, the input for test 1 with X, and then the input for test 2 with Y, the input for test 3 with Z, and then the final output with P, right? So as you can see, there is the demonstration right there. So these weights for now, I just put random weights there, there is no like process, so I just put random weights. The goal is to check which value I'm going to get in the end, right? So we have these weights right here, and then we have this process. So as you can see, like in the last, it will depend on your model, right? In our model here, we only have linearization in the nodes that are in the middle, but on the last node, because as you can see, these values, they are like the activation function that we have selected is going to be too small, right? So to reduce the effect of that, we're gonna only use we're gonna only use linearization in the last node, right? And then we're gonna get our predicted value. So I'm gonna show you how to go about this. So as you can see, we have 3 inputs, right? So we're gonna focus on each node. We're gonna first focus on this first node with these 3 inputs and try to check what is the output, right? And check also you remember there are 2 processes that occur in each node. So it's gonna, in this case, we're gonna have both the summation and the activation function. So we'll select our activation function. In this case, we're gonna select the sigmoid function, right? The process is going to be the same for the other node, and then we will have, so I'm going for the first neuron, which is this one, right? We have these 3 inputs. Like I told you how the process go, we have 3 inputs, and we know that each input, it has a weight associated with it, right? And then each node, it has a bias. So we're gonna have the product, the sum of products, right? So as you can see here, we have X multiplied by its weight, the weight that it is associated with, the same with Y, associated with W3, and then we have Z also associated with W5, and then we add the bias, and then we're gonna get our summation, right? including this. Remember, you add the products and then you include the bias. So the sum that we're gonna get in this case, if I substitute the values, we're gonna get this, right? And then remember, we have to select an activation function. So in this process, on the last half of the node, we have selected what we call the sigmoid function. So if we substitute that summation inside this sigmoid function, we are going to get our answer as 1, right? And then, so we are done with this first part, right? So we're gonna move to the next one, second part of the neuron. So it's the same story, right? We have these inputs, they have weights associated with them, right? As you can see here, each input, it has two what can I say, it has two links, right? Because each input is connected to these two nodes, right? Also for the second one, for the third one. But this is not always the case, right? Right here we are just explaining how the process goes, right? So it might happen that sometimes another node is connected to only one input, and then another one, and maybe two of them is connected to one node, and the other one is connected to the one node alone, right? So let us proceed. So the process is the same. We're gonna say input X multiply by weight 2, input Y multiply plus input Y multiply by W4, input Z multiply by W6, and then we add the bias, right? So we're gonna add the bias right here, and we get our answer 92,22, and then we go to the next process, activation, and then we get 1. So this is our final output, which is 1 if, right? And then now we are on this third neuron, the last one, right? So the process is also the same, right? Remember, P1 it's 1, we just did it. For neuron 1, we get this one right here, right there, right? So and then for P2, we also have we also went through that process, and then we're gonna multiply with this weight. For P1, we're gonna multiply with this weight, and then we're gonna add the bias, and then the whole sum is gonna give us this. But in this case, we're not gonna use the sigmoid function, because in this case we need a value, right? We need a value, not, remember, a sigmoid function, it gives us a value between 0 and 1, right? You can do research on that. You can just do some research. What is a sigmoid function? So it's one of the functions that are it's what we call a logistic function, right? It's one of the functions that are used in machine learning, right? So the problem with that function, it only gives us the values in the range of 0 and 1, right? So in this step, we need a value that is greater than 1, actually. So we are not gonna proceed with the next step. We're gonna end here with summation, and then we're gonna get our final answer is 12,96. So as you can see, the predicted output, this is our predicted, so this is the output we got from our model, right? But then the actual value, it's not that, right? So our model gave us a different value from the actual one, right? So what's gonna happen now, we are going to check the error, right? So we know that if you are teaching a model, maybe to predict, predicting something, it requires accuracy, right? For example, if you predict that the weather tomorrow is gonna rain, right, you need to have a setting that goes with the setting, accuracy, right? So in this case, we have that difference, that error, right? So we need to minimize the error using backward propagation, right? So if you did calculus, if you're familiar with derivatives, right? In calculus, you know that we use derivatives in order to, sometimes we have what we call the critical points, right? And then you know that sometimes we need to identify if that is the maximum or the minimum, right? So in this case, the very important word is this minimum, minimize the error, right? So this difference right here, right, we all have to define what we call the cost, right? And then we will try to minimize this using backward propagation. So backward, what do they mean with backward? So as you can see, in forward propagation, we started from the input and then we moved forward to the output, right? But then in backward propagation, we start here from the output, actually from the output, because we are going to calculate the cost function. All right, so that's where we start. We're gonna start from the output and then move back to the inputs, and then in that process we are updating the weights. So we want to know which weights that should be, these weights, they have to be replaced with which values in order for us to reduce the error, right? So yeah, so I think for this tutorial we can end it here, because from here the only thing left is what we call backward propagation, right? And it has its own concepts. There are certain concepts that we need to understand, and backward propagation is a very, very important concept, when it comes to machine learning, right? And it will require you to do some mathematics. Understand? You have to have like a bit solid math. So yeah, thank you guys. This is where the tutorial ends. So we are going to proceed on the next one, where we are going to explain backward propagation. Yeah, see you on the next one.